Really? I know, but I want to do the video this time. Thank you. Hello and welcome back. I am Mr. Sosatris. It is Monday, and this week I wanted to talk about my favorite science fiction series. I just finished recently reading the first book in the Expanse series, and honestly I was kind of expecting to hate this one, but there was something about the world and the diversity of the characters that just, it fit into my brain in a certain way, and so I'm kind of in like a sci-fi kick now. But anyway, so it got me thinking about my favorite sci-fi series and why they're my favorite sci-fi series. So this isn't going to be in like a whole huge any kind of order, but we'll just kind of make this work. So first on the list is Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey series. There's 3 sequels, and there's something about the way he writes that just, it soothes my brain. It's almost like, I don't know, he gets very technical and just kind of starts obsessing about minutia and things that you wouldn't think are important. It has kind of a hard sci-fi feel, even though it's not. And I don't know, it's just, there's something about it that just, it's very comforting. And also, I think the fact that it's got this big, huge, grand, cosmic kind of theme to it. If you've seen the movie is quite different from the book. The overall plot's kind of the same, but the details are a little bit different. And I feel like the two exist in kind of their own separate worlds. But there's just something about humanity coming up against evidence of vastly superior alien intelligence that they can't comprehend that I just love so much. It's kind of a cliche in sci-fi at this point, but I just adore it. And the sequels are pretty good. I really like the second one especially. There's a really cool kind of alien life form that we meet in that one that is sort of unlike anything I've seen before or since. The final 2 aren't as good as the first 2, I will say. They're still great, and I still enjoy them, but they kind of refer back to sort of the events in the first 2 books so much that it just kind of feels like there's not really a need for those books. Like, there's a whole section where it's like there's a flashback, and it's literally just a section from the second book, just repeated word for word, like as in a flashback. So, you know, take with that what you will, but the series as a whole, just, I love the vibes, I love the feel, and the first 2 books especially are wonderful, and they just have this sense of just being faced with something cosmically unknowable and not really knowing what that means for you. If it means, like, is humanity destined to become like that? Is humanity destined to be conquered by someone like that? It's just kind of leaves things kind of open, and it kind of scratches the same itch that like cosmic horror does for me. I really love cosmic horror for that same concept, except it's not scary. It's more just like awe-inspiring and grand, and it's so great. I love it. Arthur C. Clarke is one of the few like older sci-fi authors that has aged pretty well. There's still some stuff, most of his characters are kind of by default white kind of things, and it does kind of feel a bit like, you know, American-centric or Western-centric and whatnot. But for the most part, his stuff has aged pretty well, and his stuff is still a lot of fun to read. So that is Arthur C. Clarke's Odyssey series, I guess is what it's called. Next up on my list is Octavia Butler's Lilith's Brood trilogy. This was written in the 80s, I believe is when this was written, but it feels so modern and meaningful and important. And it's just really creative. I love Octavia Butler anyways. I need to read her Parable duology. But I've read this, I've read Kindred and Fledgling. And she does sci-fi so well. She's got the feel of Arthur C. Clarke and like Isaac Asimov and all them, but like with a much more contemporary, inclusive, honest kind of worldview that I really, really like. This is a series where you've got humanity has kind of destroyed Earth, and this alien species shows up, and they're going to kind of help Earth repopulate. They're being totally noble and supportive and helpful. And these aliens are quite different. Their concept of gender is a lot more complicated. And there's kind of this sense that they need to somehow fix humanity or change humanity in order for them to not destroy the Earth again. But there's always this question. It's like, are they good? Are they bad? Should we trust them? What's going on? And so the main character, Lilith, wakes up on one of their ships, is kind of taught about what's going on, and she's sort of put in charge of sort of making humanity ready to have their planet back. And it's just so thought-provoking. This isn't a, like, firefight, explosions, huge, vast adventure kind of story. It's much more asking questions about humanity and sort of the idea of what makes humans human. It gets into the concept of transhumanism. It questions concepts of gender, and it just puts this character in a position where she has the ability to sort of become better, but she's worried what that means to her humanity, what that means to sort of what she is and who she is and her ties to her people. The first book focuses on her. I think the second one and the third one focus on sort of descendants. She does still show up, but it tells kind of a saga of sort of how humanity changes and how certain characters change more than others and what that means. Are they still considered human? And it's wonderful. It's thought-provoking. It's insightful. It's just gorgeous. I love the way she writes. It's very technical. Again, like Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke. It's very technical, and you just feel like you're there. And it's so great to see a main character. The main character is an African-American woman who's able to ask questions about race and culture and stuff that, like, if this was written in like the 50s, the main character would be like a white American guy, and he'd never ask questions about that kind of stuff. He would just ask questions about what makes us people, kind of thing. But the characters in this one address so much more, and it feels bigger. Even though the books themselves aren't massive, it feels big and sweeping and wonderful. And these are new editions that recently came out. They're so pretty. And there's like special features in the back and stuff. So yes, Lilith's Brood, an excellent series, would recommend highly. Next up is Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy. The first book is called Red Mars. I really, really love this one. This is what's kind of considered like hard sci-fi. It's sort of as plausible as possible. There obviously are some things in there that, you know, there's leaps that are taken that aren't possible, but it's sort of as scientifically accurate as possible. What it shows is sort of the time from kind of the first manned mission to Mars that is like that's sent with the intent to colonize it. And it follows the colonization process, the terraforming process, the cultural changes that happen as Mars goes from being like an Earth project to being like its own culture, to being its own sort of its own world with its own people kind of thing, as time goes on. It spans quite a lot of time. There's kind of a sci-fi trick that's used at one point to kind of keep the main characters with us for longer than they normally would be. So you do get to stay with kind of the main cast of characters for the most part for a long time. But I just love the way this is written. The cast is really diverse. There's people from all over the world who come together in this mission. And there's just lots of questions about, again, questions about, you know, humanity, and questions about culture, and questions about government. Kim Stanley Robinson does tend to be a little more socialist. So if that offends you, please do not read this. But it's questioning sort of utopia and what is utopia even possible, even if you have kind of the best minds coming together to make something good. What are the drawbacks of kind of all of that? And it's so great. It asks big, huge questions, and it's really, really interesting. Robinson is one of my favorite sci-fi writers just because he's able to describe really mundane things in a really engaging way. Like, there's a section, I think, in the second book where he's just talking about lichen. That's it, lichen. And I was just, like, obsessed. Like, it's just, you're so stuck with it. I will say there is an audiobook version. The narrator isn't bad, but I think the narrator kind of hurts it because it's such a diverse cast, and so you really need someone who can do like multiple accents, and in that audiobook everyone just kind of sounds like they're all from Chicago, even if they're from Russia or China or anything. So it's I would say read it in like book form or ebook form, just because it's so diverse that your mind kind of needs to kind of create that diverse cast of characters in your mind. Because if you're listening to it, it's very easy to imagine that just like everyone is kind of the same. But hopefully there's a new audiobook in the future that has kind of more accents and more kind of like differentiation between different characters, because literally everyone has kind of the exact same voice. But the series as a whole is great. It's big, it's sweeping, it asks crazy questions, there's some kind of really weird moments, weird in a good way, and it's wonderful. This kind of feels like a kind of unofficial prequel to a lot of other sci-fi things like, you know, Mass Effect or The Expanse, that kind of thing, where it's sort of like the beginning of going out into the solar system and what we did to kind of make them habitable for human life. So would recommend this. I love this trilogy so much. It's so good. Next on my list is Mary Robinette Kowal's Lady Astronaut series. The first book is called The Calculating Stars, and this is another one. I think there's another book coming out soon, and I cannot wait for it because this is a great series. Again, this is more hard sci-fi, but it's so focused on character, and a lot of these, all three of them, are sort of mysteries in a way. And there's also, all the characters kind of struggle with mental illness in different ways, and so there's kind of explorations of you know, how do you function when everyone else thinks that you shouldn't be able to function when you have a mental illness? Like, does it just keep your career on hold? Do you just have to stay at home and do nothing? Or do you actually get out there and do things and find ways to kind of work within the limits of your illnesses in order to still be a kind of a whole, complete person? The series follows a cataclysmic meteor that strikes the Earth, and that happens right at the beginning, so that's not a spoiler. It's like the first chapter. And Earth very rapidly is becoming sort of inhabitable for human life because of this meteor strike that's just ruined kind of the world weather patterns. And so it takes place in the 50s, and so the space race kind of happens sooner than it normally did. So instead of humans going to the moon for the first time in 1969, you've got humanity saying, okay, we've got like maybe 50 years left on Earth. We need to colonize space. We need to move people off the planet. We need to find ways to survive. And so the space kind of project in the US, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but it starts sooner than it normally would. It starts in the 50s. And so you've got kind of that like Hidden Figures sort of era colonizing space. And so you've got, the first two books follow one character, the third one focuses on another character, so you get to see kind of different things, and it's just, it's so good. This one is sort of about the beginnings of everything. This one's focused on getting to Mars. This one's focused on a moon base, and they're so engaging. The characters are wonderful. I love the way Mary Robinette Kowal writes just complex, real, relatable characters. They're not superheroes. They're not like Marvel characters that are sort of like intentionally quirky in a fun way kind of thing. They feel like real people that you just like know and can relate to, and they're put in this like insane situation and having to kind of basically save the planet with the technology that they had in the 1950s. On top of that, there's all kinds of stuff about political climate of the Earth, racial tensions, just, it feels a lot bigger than it is, because the books essentially are just really tightly written kind of mysteries or like problem-solving kind of stories. But there's so much going on around it that it just feels big and huge and wonderful. And I cannot wait to see this series continue. I love it so much. The writing style is great. And also one thing that I also really appreciate is the way she writes married characters. So often you have kind of a romance shoehorned into a story, or you have a character who sort of like has a dead spouse or something for extra drama. And in this one, the main character we meet in this one, she's just happily married, and we see her and her husband kind of working together, and it's very healthy, and I really, really like that. So, yes, would recommend Lady Astronaut, Mary Robinette Kowal, so good. And finally, I have Dan Simmons' Hyperion Cantos. The first book is one of the most unusually laid out sci-fi novels I've ever read, but it works so good. It's essentially something akin to the Canterbury Tales, where you've got a bunch of people going to this planet for some reason. There's kind of an anomaly on that planet that will somehow maybe help them or give them answers. And so on the journey to this planet, the characters all tell their stories, and each story is sort of a different genre. You've got like a sci-fi horror story, you've got a mystery, you've got the military sci-fi story, and it's just so compelling. And then the series continues. This one sort of gives the kind of closure that all the characters needed. And then these two, it's kind of its own duology that goes farther forward. This deepens the mystery of sort of what is really going on in the big picture, because there's a whole lot of other stuff happening. And it also explains a very mysterious figure, which is on the cover of this book, that no one really knows what they are. And so we get answers to who that is, where it comes from in this duology here. But the series as a whole is just great. Now, I will say two things. First off, the book throws you right into the middle of things. The prologue in the first book is bewildering. Like, you will have no clue what's going on, and that's okay. So, like, there's like flying trees, and there's talks about like the politics of what's going on at the time, and talks about like a war maybe, and it's really overwhelming, and he doesn't explain any of it, but I promise it does come together. But the world building in this one is so good. This is kind of sci-fi pushed to its absolute limit. You've got time travel, you've got combat, you've got mysteries, you've got philosophical questions, and you've got like political machinations. Like, it's sort of, it feels like every kind of sci-fi genre all at once, and it's just great. The other thing I'll warn you about is it's very obvious that Dan Simmons is like an English nerd, and I love him for it, because that's what I am. But I know some people have said that certain aspects of the story feel a little pretentious, because he kind of finds really cool ways to make references to like classical literature and like 19th century poetry and all kinds of stuff. So if you're not bothered by that, you will really love this. But this book, or this series, is just, it's everything. It's huge, and it isn't even like, the books aren't even all that massive, which cracks me up, because it feels like when you're done reading this, it feels like you've read like a 10-page or a 10-book series. But it's just excellent. It's so well written. Don't feel like it's stuffy or anything, because there's parts of it that are like terrifying. There's parts that are adventurous. There's one particular character who's really funny, and their story is more like a comedic farce, and all that kind of stuff. So it's got everything, and it's sort of, I have yet to read a sci-fi series that is this big, but also being consistently engaging and good. The other book that I was thinking of was Dune, and I do genuinely love the first Dune book. And the sequels aren't bad, but they go so off the rails that it just, overall, the reading experience of reading the whole Dune series just isn't super satisfying, because after a while it just gets so out there and weird that you feel a little lost, and it kind of loses touch of what hooks you in the first book. So that's why I didn't include Dune in this series, because I do love the first one. Even the second and third one are really good. But as a series as a whole, I don't think it's super satisfying. And it also just kind of feels like it didn't really know where it wanted to go, and it was just kind of expanding for the sake of expanding. So that's my rant against Dune. But the Hyperion Cantos is wonderful. So with that, I will let you go. I'll see you next week. You have a good time reading. Bye.